Hello, welcome back to the Esoteric 7. Today we'll be doing part 5 of the series. We've come quite a bit of a ways. In the previous video, we shed some light upon the final 3 rays, kingdoms, planes, etc., while also revealing the correspondences between them. Just like how, on one side we had the first 3 and then we had the 4, which combines or crosses rather all of them. On the other side, then we have the final 3, which also corresponds to the other side of the system. So we were only beginning to reveal the correspondences between them on the other side. Today, we will be venturing further into the higher realms and attempting to finally reach the great abode so many call heaven, or the realm of Shambhala. A key takeaway from the previous video is that there is both a physical sun and a spiritual sun. But to put it quite simply, we can easily see them with regard to the chakra system. The physical sun would be the solar plexus, and the spiritual sun would be the crown, the space above the human crown. For instance, as the fifth ray of concrete science might state that it is the physical sun, or our third solar plexus, that is the realm of objective behavior, animal instinct, fully manifested nature, and deliberated results. But for some reason, the spiritual sun is unknown. So science disproves it, limitates it, and sends it down into even further down, into the forces of generation and materialism. So if, for instance, one would observe our solar plexus, they would see that most of its energy and solar substance is sent even further down into the regions below, or the underworld. And because it is the governing lion and king of the world, it would seem that the physical sun, or lion, only sends its sulfuric gaseous radiations down below itself within its own hierarchy, which results in the vegetative generative forms of matter within the sacral region. And then, however, when the radiation becomes too cool and the distance is too far away, the results are the root or mineral kingdom, where everything breaks down again and hardens and solidifies, but also loses the power and the will of the sun, only adhering strictly to the elements and mineral forces. However, if you look at our system, our chakra system, firstly examining the solar plexus, you can see that as the sun, it also has points of radiation on either side of it, where the forces of vegetative life and generation are formed. And then it has further points away from it where the radiation and the warmth and comfort of it is lost, resulting in just minerals and elements, or, the vast depths of space and beyond. So if you break it down, then the sacral region is the first plane of generation and vegetation, and then the heart chakra is the second plane of generation, and that's where man comes in, because that's what separates the animal of unrealized love or heart creative magic or power from the man who realizes the heart and love side of the creative power. However, on the other side of that sun, on the upper part of it, it was man who finally saw himself to be above and in charge of the grand hierarchy of material, earthly animals and existence. For he possessed a self-consciousness, and though he may not have acquired the certain instinctive abilities of his apex predator below him, he thus acquired attributes and powers of his own, the powers of universal love and consciousness. So could it be this heart in which man truly and first recognized himself as a divine being? I'd like to think yes, because the heart would be the great apex of the pyramid of the spirit. So yes, away and apart from the one side of the material sun, which is the region below, is the next radiation, the radiation of love within the heart chakra. But don't get me wrong, it's not necessarily the spiritual sun quite yet. It's just the upper part of the material sun being realized in pure self-consciousness, and the ego of man finally awakened. So this heart realization truly defined man from animal, And though he may have been born of pure desire and active impulse, like the animal, with his heart, with his true heart, he finally began to see his divine purpose, which is of a higher plane. The heart, on the other side of the sulfuric burning physical sun, became a generative region of its own. However, its lower generations of passions, impulses, and folly soon became subdued by its higher forms of universal love, peace, and harmony among all beings of light. And when these dedications were fully made known and realized within humankind and society, the rule of the material sun was no more. The animal kingdom no longer sought to rule man, and the positive mental kingdom was no longer ruled by the negatively polarized and charged monad upon the astral plane. So it reversed. So as the monad was the sixth plane of existence, its correspondence was the astral plane below, the second plane of lower emotions. So what it did is it reversed the negatively polarized monad and turned it into the positively polarized monad, in which man was soon to realize his divine self within. So for instance, the lower generative heart is closer to the solar plexus, therefore it only gives in to animal desires, physical passions, and materialism. But the higher universal heart is just far enough away from the sun, or rather the heats and the passions of the sun, to basically cool those lower passions and emotions and embrace the loftier, airier heart of universal love and awareness. So this heart would be closer to the throat chakra on the same side. We're about to discuss that in just a moment. It is this form of love which connects man to God and allows him to venture into the upper chambers of his temple. You know what? I was just watching a video earlier about how the word and the voice was the secret sword or the secret power of the ancients, especially the ancient mystery schools. I always believed that, but I'd never actually received affirmation of that until tonight. I find that really strange. So it allows man to truly connect to God and venture into the upper chambers of his temple, which is where those final three rays exist. Or not only do they exist, but they connect man to the first three rays, which are the divine Trinity. So while the root chakra is the hardened, crystallized, or icy plane with no radiation left from the sun, the sacral chakra is the watery, flowing plane with radiation and some warmth, which allows it to sustain life, just like our Earth is far enough away from the sun to begin to sustain life and help us survive. And if we were any further, like on Mars or Jupiter, we would all die and perish. That would be the crystallized plane of just the elements and the minerals. So the solar plexus then is the material source of said radiation and generative life. It's the gaseous, also right next to the liquidic. And then on the other side of that solar plexus, the heart is yet another watery plane of radiation. And you can connect that to emotions. Similar to which is also correspondent to the sacral, except that it generates higher, more divinely manifested forms, other than just, impulses, lower impulses. And finally, the throat. Here we go. And then finally, the throat is another crystallized plane with no radiation or warmth from the material sun. But it also makes it similar to the root chakra, just as we discussed in the last video, how the root chakra and the throat happen to be the two biggest orifices on the human body. But here we get this. It is no coincidence that the root and the throat house the two. Oh wait, it's this video. I'm sorry, it's this video. It's no coincidence that the root and the throat house the two biggest orifices of the human body, in which case there seems to be only the presence of darkness. So the light from the material sun would appear to be gone. On one side, the root chakra, the light from the material sun is completely gone, sending you into the void of space, right? And then, but on the other side of that, the voice, the open mouth, the throat chakra appears to be a darkness of its own. But where does this word come from? Where does this magical symbolic language come from? There must be another sun, another spiritual sun coming from someplace above. But when man first produced sound, he had a massive awakening of consciousness. And at that point in time, he saw sound not to be just sound, but to be the most magical form of expression. He saw sound as a vibration which not only shapes the reality around himself, but the very universe. And it also reflects the universe within himself, up above. When the first human being produced sound, there issued forth strings of hidden symbols, mysterious images, mysterious languages, concepts. Hence, the word concept and consciousness are related and beyond. So consciousness would be like a hole or a space from which some kind of thing emerges from, and concepts would be very similar. It would be the same space of which several strings of ideas and imaginations and thought forms revolve around and encircle around, hence the term concept. So it's almost like a galaxy. Concept creates a black hole, and all the ideas and thought forms begin to emerge from it and swirl around it, as if trying to reveal some hidden place. So this sound, unknown to the lower beasts or beings among the physical plane, became the true distinction between man and beast, and especially spirit from matter. From this sound came all symbols, all interpretations, all languages, all knowledge, and all sacred wisdom taught from above. The human being derived all of these symbols, signs, patterns, and acknowledgments from some place unknown to himself, a place beyond the physical sun. No, even a place where a true spiritual sun must exist. Sound itself is what channeled the upper heart knowledge, while taking the generative substance which originated in the sacral region and passing it up through the heart and finally making its way into the throat, where the serpent who once dwelled in the underworld, which is the bottom side of Abraxas, as spoken in previous videos, the lower tree of death, or you could say the tree of knowledge, but it became positively polarized by the higher heart chakra and embodied the tongue, which then became the vine of wisdom belonging to the tree of life. And the tongue itself is also in the shape of the serpent, yet it is the upper serpent, is also symbolically related to the sword of penetrating wisdom and pure divine consciousness. So the substance that was carried up with it became the substance of science itself, or our science at least, the substance, which is actually the substance of the fifth ray. Hence the fifth chakra, the throat chakra, is also corresponding to the fifth ray in regard to the substance that creates the divine spiritual science belonging to the fifth ray. You could say the positive spiritual science, which is substance, polarizes to the negative concrete science, which is pure data and facts. But you could also ask, where do they get this data and facts from? Do they get it from the substance? And from it came the gift of medicine as well as healing. They learned that. This can be seen in Grecian traditions with figures such as Hermes, who carried the coiling serpents in the form of the caduceus, as well as Asclepius, who carried the rod of the serpent, whose symbol medical practitioners use to this day. So the throat chakra, along with the transmuted substance carried from below, becomes more than just concrete science alone. It also becomes the science of vocal healing, mantras, even prayer, which is actually a magical form of healing, because not only are those in prayer communicating to their God, they are also tapping into the vibrations of their voice and spoken sound while spreading healing frequencies and energies through themselves as well as the ones they pray for and to. This can also be seen in the sacred Om, which is perhaps the most magical sound known to man, and the ascended masters have used it since the dawning of time to spread healing, love, and peace throughout themselves, their group, humanity, the world, and the universe. Om is the sacred sound which connects the devotee to God, their higher self, their great I Am presence, and it is no surprise that the fifth chakra also corresponds to the fifth plane, which is the atmic plane, or the higher self. So sound truly connect you to your higher godlike self? I'm willing to say yes. So when practicing and meditating with the sacred sound, one is actually practicing the great science of the ages, connecting to their higher divine self, who thus joins them with both the monad and Adi, which are the generations and reflections above. We'll get into that in a minute. Furthermore, while the throat chakra also corresponds to the root chakra, then that must mean that the elements and minerals within our very universe are shaped, molded, and formed by sound, and that as we, as humans, are also the creators, shapers, and formers of worlds, systems, galaxies, and universes, especially the ones within ourselves. Everything is made by vibration. Science would not argue with that. And that is why the universe and molecular biology is all shaped in circles, spheres, curvatures, and perfectly rounded forms. For instance, not once will you see a sharp pointed object either in space or on the molecular level, because that is not the way sound works. Sound works and is manifested in smooth, curved shapes and forms. Take, for instance, the sacred sound Om. Hold on for a second. Sound, when vibrated upon water, does what? Creates ripples, it creates circles. So if you look at the universe as water, then what happens when a vibration hits it? It results in circular objects. It results in spherical shaped objects. And centers which other spherical objects revolve around. Because that's how sound works. It moves in curved like or circumflexing style patterns, which shapes everything in smooth curves, both on the macrocosmic and microcosmic level. So take, for instance, the sacred sound Om. If you study the sound closely, you will hear that it resonates first from the back of the throat of the devotee, which produces a blunt, bassy tone, and then it oscillates into the front of the throat, which produces a clearer, more defined tone, and then it oscillates yet again back to their throat, the back of their throat, etc. For instance, contemplate this. That is the oscillating movement of Om. It all moves in circular shapes and patterns. That's resonance. That's what the magical expression of resonance does. It moves everything in circular, spherical shapes. So this can be easily seen and understood within the mind of the pupil who understands sound and resonance, for they will be able to properly visualize the oscillation effect and thus be able to understand how it shapes both the macrocosmic elemental universe and the microcosmic molecular mini universe. Therefore, sound alone reveals much, especially that beyond the physical sun, there is a perfectly indescribable, infinite spiritual sun. Because if the point of warmth and radiation of the physical sun is lost, and we're here in the throat and the sound region, how are we able to tap into the minerals and the elements so well and produce the sound and thus express the magic? We must be speaking from some higher spiritual dimension. So when sound issuing forth from the throat chakra reflected first upon the human mind, get this, the sound reflected upon the human mind, not vice versa, it resulted in a new birth of consciousness. So sound awakened this new birth of consciousness. This new birth budded the flower of his inner lotus, of man's inner lotus, and his third eye became awakened, if not but to give a brief glimpse into his higher mind and heavenly abode. He knew then at that instance that there was another source of radiation coming from somewhere else. For while his voice contained the transmuted seeds of generating life, which he gathered up from below, there must have been some other kind of sun which sent the proper food and nutrients to thus bud his upper flower of awareness and conscious expansion. Just like every tree needs a strongly rooted foundation. Strongly rooted foundation. So man's voice granted that possibility of the strong foundation. And with every word, symbol, mantra, and phrase he invoked, he brought forth new seeds and thus watered them well with his voice. But just as a simple blade of grass cannot be mistaken for a flower, man's words alone could not have been enough to complete the process. He could only have watered those plants, and those plants could have only grown up as shoots of vegetative life, but they could not have budded from himself alone. No, there had to be a source of great levels of phosphorus, which is the one ingredient which buds the great flowers of immortal solar life. For example, you can water your garden with big words all day long, which is the role nitrogen plays in vegetative growth. But without phosphorus, without that grand spiritual connection to the God self and monad and that radiating solar force, They are just common weeds. They will all become common weeds and will soon wither and die. But when the sacred word is discovered, man realizes that he is not completely the governor of his own words or thoughts, but that he is intuitively and fully connected to his higher God self. This is what fully awakens the third eye and receives the outpouring of life and life from the Adi. This is what the divinely unknown Father of positive will energy will reflect upon the newly awakened consciousness of the monad, which is like a light of oneness that completely blankets and surrounds the inner throne of the single eye. This is what awakens the realized Son of Consciousness, whose streams of love wisdom emanate from his sacred word, illuminating the mother of blanketing light who enshrouds the throne with her indescribable life force, while joining with the invisible Father of the Absolute, who mirrors the Son in his highest sense and in his image, revealing the divine reflection within and turning him into the light being that he was chosen to be, fully making him a true Son of God. So going back to before, what I was saying earlier is that most of science only gives us dead crops, dried up, withered, concrete dead crops, but it is our love and our devotion that we get from the sixth ray that we express with our throat and our voice that waters those would-be crops of concrete knowledge and data and blows them up into a much grander, much more wholesome expression of science and the nature of true belief. So you see the one who sits upon the inner throne, pouring and radiating forth from the crown chakra, which is where the spiritual sun is thus completely unseen and blanketed by the mother of eternal light, who is the generative substance of pure thought and consciousness, which receives enough radiation from the spiritual sun Father above, while also receiving enough water and enough minerals and food from the sun to be able to continue emanating life and light. And the child of the outpouring thus gazes upon that very blanket of light within, which guards his inner ark of the covenant, that cloud which perfectly enshrouds and veils his inner sanctuary, and thus speaks it into his sacred word, creating a ripple upon the light, which cascades and spreads out into circles of knowing, and he thus sees his divine reflection as the Father of eternity, the one who he is to fully embody, be transfigured by, and truly become. And it all takes place in consciousness. This truly represents the final upper half of Abraxas, for the rooster head is a symbol of the firmament, a symbol of finally leaving the earth behind to thus dwell in heaven. If one is truly awakened and God realized, then the birds of the heavens, especially the ones who greet the dawn, are but microcosmic forms of heavenly angels who fly around their God, love their God, and surround his throne with praise and glory. They are thus redeemed from the underworld of matter, or that serpent, which once belonged to the lower portions of the physical sun, much like snakes within our earth or fish within our ocean, and are thus transmuted by the higher heart of universal oneness, becoming saved from their slithering counterparts, and are able to fly within the heavens. All of these occurrences do not simply happen outside of the initiate. No, they're to be seen as divine reflections of that which is occurring within. Signs that the initiate has achieved a level of mastery, has fully transmuted the substance, returned it to source, and redeemed its spiritual potency. Everything that once existed in the eternal heavenly realm had to result in the fall of matter. If not, we would not exist. The universe would not exist, etc. But it is our jobs as humans to remember this, to know this, and to redeem this by all possible measures. For instance, man realized that the very thoughts within his brain were electrical impulses, and impulses that resulted in the formation of matter, much like the great fall from heaven of the unspeakable one, and this matter thus dripped and fell down the human spine all the way into the root chakra. This was discussed previously when the first ray of willpower gave in to desire and impulse, thus resulting in the negatively polarized material body of the seventh ray. But this was all necessary, for God cannot exist with our unknowing of its presence. So we began as minerals of a lower kingdom, developed slowly into vegetables who gave in mostly to their unreasonable devotional, even sexual passions, and then we made our way into the animal kingdom, who were literally of the third ray of science of the sun, or at least the science of the sun and order, along with instinct, and finally made our way into the human form, which thankfully crossed and combined them all the emanations. From there, we saw the heart to be receiving the radiation from that pesky material sun, but also to be receiving a sort of balance from the voice and the throat, of which we dug back deep into the elements and learned how to utilize them to shape the void of which we were soon face. And then, when we fully gazed upon the deep, dark space of nothingness, we hence realized that that very darkness, was in fact our own consciousness. So we spoke into it, and our voice, like a droplet of water, fell upon it, resulting in ripple waves that spread out into eternity, and a reflection of which no words could describe. This very reflection was of the great God of I Am, the awakening of the Alpha Omega principle within our brain, which is pure darkness, and the budding, or rather the Omega principle within our brain, which is pure darkness, and the budding of the contrastingly colorful flower inside that very brain, which could come no other than from the spiritual source above the head, the crown of eternal and ineffable light. It was only from the spiritual sun that gave the levels of phosphorus for that bud to actually awaken and bloom. We thus give the word, but it is the mind which receives it, refines it, and delivers it forth from the eternal mind, or rather into the eternal mind of God, of whom receives it as well, and returns the phosphoric light to bud our inner lotus. Thus, that which was sent down into the physical plane below originated from the source. There is no lie or deception about it. But it is our job as one humanity to redeem them all, and restore them to the divine plan. While the first ray resulted in the physical production of the seventh, or ray of the moon, we must not ignore this sacred process. In fact, the first ray being the most pure, which is Sanat Kumara in his most actively potent form, decided to manifest into the earthly kingdom or sacrifice himself. So his results were physical embodiments such as the son of Shiva, a boogeyman, or a serpent of power. You could even look at it like a Baphomet. It's all seventh ray energy. But we as human beings must learn to change our perspectives on how we see beings like this, for we are not taught that these beings are evil, malevolent, or part of some maleficent design, but that they represent our inner nature, and somewhat because of us, unwillingly became the beings of disharmony and conflict. No, we must learn to gaze upon these figures with a fresh perspective, that no, they are not the figures of some fabricated devil or demon, but they are in fact the figures of the untransmuted and untransformed states of ourselves, our inner selves, and just as Jung called it, they are but our shadow selves. So just as any seemingly holy preacher or speaker of the word may seem to be as such, how much potency are they actually generating? How much are they actually giving out? That would seem to be the question in this day and age, for the Bible-thumping pastors out there who claim to know the Word of God are actually just trying to regurgitate some dead truth, while filling their pockets, while the true light seekers are out here still trying to uncover the Word of God, which we thought was concealed from the profane. So we look to the fallen ones, the descent of matter, or spirit into matter. We look to the mundane, we look to the forces of the lower tree and the fabricated evils which do not exist, because we know that within them is the greatest potency, and thus the greatest possibility of transmutation and ultimate illumination. Sanat Kumara, the great eternally youthful one, began as the seventh son of Shiva, so he thus descended down into the planes of generative matter. But we as humans recognized his fall and thus vowed to return him and ourselves to our point of origin, for we were taught that we are fallen beings as well. When we carried both him and ourselves upwards, we met yet again in the heart chakra, the great place of harmony, art, and beauty. And from that point, we thus saw the proper direction of life flow, and even Sanat Kumara said that it was his time to reach a final initiation, a time to shed his final skin, to escape the reddened realm of chaos and disorder, and to finally ascend himself in human form into the firmament above. This is the point when he moved away from his common form as the green man, thus shedding his 100-year form and embracing the coloration of the firmament, which is a greenish blue hue. Also the Aquarian color palette, and thus the ultimate joining of both the heavens and the earth, and that's through the sound. Sanat Kumara now quite literally wants to join us within both the heavens and the earth, or the sound and the upper heart chakra. We were thus carried forth as Shiva of the first degree well into the second form, which is Vishnu, orderer and structure of the cosmic universe. And finally, from that, we made it into the head of Brahma, which is the all-seeing, foresighted, and much corresponding to that of the head of Abraxas. From the root, which is Shiva, there comes the Shiva Lingam, which is always associated with the root chakra. But from it, the next generative organ belongs in the heart, which becomes Vishnu, the orderer and structure of the cosmos, or the upper heart, in our case. And then the plane goes out even further within the third eye, which becomes the very generator and creative potency of light, life, thought, and form, and perfect divine realization. But around them is the radiator of energy. From one side of the third eye, there exists the radiation of the spiritual crown chakra, spiritual sun. But on the other side, there exists the loss of that warmth, but also the mineral elemental word, the purely magical expression of word, which fully awakened into the spiritual form. So thank you for participating in this series. If you may have forgotten some of the other information, don't hesitate to go back to the first video and start over. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you for having you along for this this journey. It's been quite a very interesting and fascinating process. I'd love to have you back again for the next one. As always, have a great day.